Hi there, I'm Matthew Rollinson at Ucas Scientific. Hope this finds you well today. I wanted to get a presentation out there that I did last week at the University of Leeds, all about how to prepare a winning CV. Obviously it's that time of year where a lot of people are graduating, a lot of people might be for the first time writing a CV. So what I wanted to do was get a few slides over, nothing too long, but just to sort of go through a few of the basics around CV writing, and then more of a deep dive is available via the CV writing guide that Ucas Scientific produce. And also when the time comes for interviews, then we also have another highly detailed interview guide as well, and there'll be a follow-up video on this as well about covering some basics on interviews. But today I wanted to cover CVs. So what is the issue with CVs? Well, first of all, as a chemist, you're going to find that what you've done and what you were able to do are quite tangible. You know, you're working with your hands quite a bit. You're doing an activity at university which isn't necessarily going to be replicated completely in the industry that you join. So what you've got is a bit of a similar situation to if you were working in a different industry. So I've got a few different examples on this CV about other professions where it is quite a sort of intangible thing sometimes to necessarily fully write down and get the other side to appreciate, really. So if you imagine that, you know, you're a watchmaker, or you're playing first chair in an orchestra, or you know, you're an incredible artist, you know, it's the kind of job I've always felt chemistry where you've got to kind of be doing it to almost kind of show somebody how good you are at it. And the same applies to a lot of communication out there. You know, there's what you can think, what you can put into words, and what you can say, and then there's what people understand. So I just wanted to kind of open this up with like a bit of an expectation setting point, which is that you're not going to necessarily get every last detail that you want to communicate to somebody written down on that CV to the extent that they know everything about you. That's why we've got interviewing. So what has your CV got to do for you? Put simply, it's got to get you in the room interviewing, and then that's really it. That's where its usefulness kind of dies. So what we're looking to do with this presentation is just give you some of the basics as to what works, and then just plant some seeds and ensure that whatever you're producing, you know, okay, I'm on the right track with what it is that I'm writing down, especially, as I say, if you're graduating this year and you're writing that CV for the first time. So without further ado, let's go into that. So what are the key things that you want to add to a CV? Well, skills are the most important part of your chemistry CV. That's your lab skills that you've used at university. So what constitutes a skill? Well, it really is anything that you've done on your course that you've now got more knowledge of than the next person walking down the road, basically. So if you've used, for example, in chemistry, we might say HPLC or infrared spectroscopy or UV vis, then you can quite legitimately add those to your CV now. Now, one of the things that comes up time and time again when it comes to the discussion around skills is candidates will often come to us and say, I've used this skill a lot. For example, in my dissertation projects, I might have been using HPLC all the time, but I haven't used GC that much. And what mistake a lot of candidates make is that they'll therefore omit the skill that they don't feel they used as much, and they'll only include the skills that they feel completely best confident in using. My advice is don't do that, because in a way what you're doing is you're doing the interviewer's job for them, or trying to. Now, the interviewer's job is to decide whether or not you've got authority in those fields, and in a way that's not your area to be kind of going into. What your area to be in is saying what skills you feel like you have as a result of your course. And it's quite legitimate, as I say, if you've got more knowledge than somebody else who's out there who's, you know, got zero knowledge in the area, you can quite legitimately add that to your CV, and thousands of people do work like that. In terms of how to add them, I mean, the best thing about scientific skills is that they're often quite short in terms of the acronyms that they use. So they really kind of lend themselves well to columns, and that's really actually good for communication, because people read down a page, not across a page. That's why you get newspapers and magazines in columns, not, you know, kind of text that goes across. So what you can do with these CVs, you can very, very quickly, in a very kind of constrained area, sort of be really punchy with, you know, these are my skills, this is what I've got, and you can have 3 columns across the middle and all of that kind of thing. So from a standpoint of communicating a lot of information in a very short space of time, a scientific CV really kind of works. You know, this is one of the areas that we've got to strengthen. In terms of longer form things. For example, most people, if you're a graduate watching this, will have done a dissertation project. If you're a PhD watching this, obviously you've got a thesis that you can talk about. And quite often, especially in science, these are going to be in highly technical areas that require a lot of in-depth understanding and, have taken you personally years to get yourself in the position to do. What do you do with that? Because a lot of the time people worry on their CV, I'm going to confuse somebody here, I'm going to talk in all of this detail, and then that person's not going to follow me, and then I'm not going to get the job, and it's going to be a complete waste of everybody's time. Storytelling is a very, very basic aspect of any interview, and we go into this in our interview guide, which as I say, is available as a PDF, but basically it comes down to breaking it down into beginning, middle and end. My advice with anybody when they're presenting scientific data is kind of humanise it a little bit to begin with. So let's say, for example, you're on a PhD project that's working on an additive improvement that might help fuel to be more efficient, or it might be a coating that can make a solar panel work better, or whatever it is that you're doing. If you can find a way to put it in terms that people can kind of like peg to and relate to, that's really good kind of place to start. People tend to like to just kind of like feel comfortable with knowing what they're being told, and storytelling with a beginning, middle and end does that. I always use the example of Ucas Scientific is named after my two daughters, Libby and Catherine. The story's 6 years old now, but I set this company up in a spare room in my house, and it's since grown and got to where it is now. But I've read bedtime stories to these two kids for years and years and years, not so much Catherine anymore, but definitely still Libby. But the bedtime stories go beginning, middle, end. They have an introduction, they have the middle part, they have the ending. The introduction, it's always really basic. It's always really like, okay, these are the ideas I'm going to give you. And then the middle part is the part where all of the action happens and all the kind of like different things are going on, etc., etc. But then you always have a conclusion to kind of like it's like put to bed the story, conclude it, put to bed all of the ideas and that kind of thing. And that's something that I think we can always use when we're writing our CVs, because let's face it, we all had bedtime stories as kids. We were all kind of in a way programmed to receive information in the format beginning, middle, end. So follow that structure, introduce it gently. This is a product which might have the following applications in industry one day, etc., etc., etc. Okay, now we can talk about the chemistry. It's this following chemical structure, and here's the reactions that I was doing to it, and here's the outcomes that I got. And then at the end, saying this is why it matters. This is the potential, results that we could be going, or this is the next step that, maybe the next person running a PhD is going to, run with my project on. Same would apply to BSc, whichever else. And what you're doing there with the information is you're effectively starting low, you're introducing a few things, and then you're going into a high point of communication where you're sort of talking about all the technical detail, and you're giving sort of details about what equipment you've used and what reaction types you've used or whatever else it is that you've done. But then you're dropping back off, and then you're going, okay, but here are the conclusions. Here's why. Here's from point A to point B. This is now point B. This is what the next step of the research is going to be. Now, what you'll find if you can communicate like that is that this middle bit, you probably lose 90% of people, okay? So most people will walk away and they'll think, oh, okay, yeah, he explained that really well. But then if you were to then ask that person later on, okay, how did they go about that reaction, or what specific, chemical were they working with? They're going to say, well, I don't know, but they're going to feel like they followed you. And that is the most important thing. It's not about what you say or about what you do, it's about how you make people feel. And your CV, what you've got to do is you've got to kind of like hit that balance in between enough information for that person, the what's in it for me, the with them, through to too long didn't read, okay? And you've got to kind of like hit that balance. And I think that balance is around about, kind of like half a page per project or something like that. I think if you can kind of like fit it into a few paragraphs, you're doing quite well. And then you can sort of pad things out with the wider details of the wider skills, etc. in a secondary skills section. We'll cover this in a moment. So the storytelling aspect is something that is really quite critical to explaining your ideas to the outside world in a way that the outside world kind of feels happy and feels comfortable having them explained to them with. Okay. The pertinent details of skills really matter when it comes to job boards as well. So we're all familiar now with the various different types of job boards that are out there. The algorithms that power them, a lot of the time, they're working off the amount of times that you might have mentioned a particular skill. They might be relating one skill to another skill, that kind of thing. So by adding those skills into the CV, your CV will work harder for you once it gets onto these job boards. And the different kind of wizardry starts happening in how these different job boards work. Leaker Scientific, we use a whole range of different job boards. I do ask these companies, okay, how do you work? What are the mechanics behind it? And, different companies tell me different things. With some it's repetition of skills, with others it's relating one skill to another. It's completely down to, how they individually design the software that goes behind it as to what information they present you with in the updates when you're scrolling your phone and suddenly you've got a notification through from what one of the boards that's out there. So because each one works differently, don't try and necessarily kind of worry too much about how they work. They all look at skills as being, the central sort of, way in which they work. Adding a home address is really useful, especially if you're looking locally. Do mention on your CV if you're prepared to relocate. Might be a good idea while you're doing that to look into various towns where you'd be happy to relocate to or happier to relocate to, because it's one thing moving somewhere, it's another thing settling there. And I always feel like if you know a few people, it's always that little bit easier. The other advice that we give is if you are going to go for more than one different job, have more than one different CV available to your audience to look at. So especially at graduation time, you might be quite happy to look into jobs in technical at the bench. You might be happy to look into jobs in technical in the office, away from the bench, things like QA or regulatory. And you might be happy to look at jobs in commercial, for example. You might be interested in the business side of science. And all three of those different areas would call for like a different presentation maybe of your skill set. And a different use of language on there. So consider having more than one CV if you're going to go for materially different job areas. I know on job boards it's difficult to add more than one CV, but when you're making those individual applications, which we'll talk about shortly, you can pick which version am I going to send out, what's going to put my best foot forward. Okay, so let's get on to the part that you came for, which is the structure of the CV. So this is not too complex a area to cover, fortunately, because it is something that's never changed in my 20 or so years in working in recruitment. So you're looking at, obviously, the real basics of, your address, your contact details. Those always need to be on there. Now, it's a lot of the time people do miss physical address off their CV, especially in this modern day and age where they think, well, it's just important to get contacted. But your CV is a communication document. It's basically communicating your suitability for that particular company to come recruit you. And for the most part, scientific jobs, you need to be in the lab, in person, basically. So what we advise with that is, do add in all of the contact details for you. And then move on to your profile. Now, the profile's kind of like a replacement for the old cover letter. I don't really see that many cover letters coming through. You get the occasional one, which is lovely. But, for the most part, people are using profile nowadays to communicate their specific, attributes they think is going to make them right for a role. Now, that can be quite a powerful sort of variable for you on a CV, insofar as you can change that depending on who you're emailing and applying to. You could include details about the specific role that you're applying to kind of make people feel special. In this day and age, I know that everyone's CV is very, very quick. We can all click on our phone. We can all apply in an instant to a job, and there isn't really kind of like a huge amount of kind of involvement. There isn't really kind of like an effort gap in between, looking at a job and applying for that particular job. Now, the problem with that is that if you really care about that particular role, if your heart is set on that particular opportunity, you're in the same kind of category as everybody else who might have just had an alert down the phone and gone, yeah, that's great. Okay, forward my CV. The website takes care of the rest, and suddenly they're in the same CV group as you are. If you want to stand out, your profile is a really great way of doing that, because you will put yourself instantly in the top group of candidates in the interviewer's mind, because fundamentally you'll have made them feel special, and you'll have put that little bit of extra effort in. Same applies to if I ever receive a CV in the post. All right, it's a little bit old-fashioned, all that kind of thing, but you know what? It communicates to me that person took the effort to go out, buy a stamp, write a letter and send it through to me. You'd be amazed the impact that the post has nowadays, even though, obviously we're living in this digital world. People are still humans. They still want to be made to feel special effectively. So your profile, great way of making people feel special about, this isn't not just some application to me. This is the job I want. Here is why. This is what I've looked into about your company. This is why I think it would suit me. Okay. Education side, obviously, your degree is the major set piece on that. as well it should be, and use that as an opportunity to, as I say, go over the dissertation projects, but also the pertinent courses that you did, especially if your pertinent courses are related to the company that you're applying to. Still include A-levels, still include GCSEs. We don't need to know every single one of them. It's quite fine to say that you got 10 A to Cs or up to 9s, and probably show my age there a little bit with A to Cs. But also the same applies to the A-levels. You know, it's still good to include your A-levels on there. I wouldn't say we're that bothered about grades anymore at the point at which you got a degree. If you feel like you want to include them, great. If you're me and they weren't that great, maybe don't worry about it. Okay, moving on. In terms of your core skills then, okay, yep. The core skills, as I say on this example CV, is best if they're kind of like listed, you know, in a nice bullet point. And the other thing I would say as well is if you're going to use an acronym, explode it out as well. So if you're going to use, you know, GC, you know, write gas chromatography next to it. Okay. The reason is that when we're searching for CVs, an individual may well search for GC, but they may search for chromatography. They may search for one and the other, or they may search for one or the other, okay? What you want to do is you want to make sure you're hitting as many searches as possible, okay? So by including the exploded out version of any acronym, as well as the acronym in itself, then you're going to come up in all of the searches for that particular skill, okay? It is, as far as I was brought up as a scientist, that is the best practice way of working as well. So if you're applying to a company and they're looking at you and they're thinking, okay, how's this person going to be once they're at the bench? You know, a well-written CV, which is, you know, kind of obeying a lot of the rules that we've got as scientists, it just kind of sets the tone really nice to say, look, I'm going to be a pro here. You know, this is how we're kicking off. You know, we're starting off in this nice formalised, nicely produced way, and it just sets the tone for a very nice conversation to be had with that company. So, as I say, skills, absolutely, they're the big detail to be adding to these CVs. Work experience, if you've got it, fantastic. If you haven't, then you can always talk more about your degree course that you did. You can always talk more about maybe specific projects that you did that are related to the job that it is you're going for. I would advise with any CV, you know, 2 pages is kind of like the optimal to go for. If you've got a lot of experience and a lot of qualification, 3 is fine. I wouldn't ever say more than 3. I think we've kind of got a bit of a cut-off really at 3 pages. I know from an academic standpoint, you know, sometimes you're given 6, 7, 8, 9 pages to write a CV, and look, if I was going for a grant and I was given 9 pages to write about myself, I'd be using 9 pages too. But when it comes to the industrial CVs that you want to put out there, you know, as I say, up to a 3-page maximum is where you want to be. Okay. The additional info and hobbies. Now, this is kind of getting into the human part of things, and it's good to have them on there because whenever I'm conducting an interview, I don't want to be kind of like almost like straight down to business straight away. I think I just want to be having like a little bit of a chat with somebody, put them at ease, that kind of thing. And the amount of times that I'll read a hobby on a CV and it'll be similar to a hobby that I have or a friend has or whatever else, and we can just have like a nice bit of chit chat before the interview. It just makes my job that little bit easier as an interviewer, you know, and you know, it allows that little bit of rapport being built in an interview situation. And again, that it all kind of adds to kind of a good experience of working with you, really. So if you add a few hobbies and interests on that CV, you know, you're absolutely onto a winner there. References, again, as a graduate, references, you might be thinking, who do I include? Well, first of all, it's quite fine to put available on request under references. And to be fair, in this day and age of data protection and that kind of thing, it might actually be a better way of doing it in 2022. I'm not fully kind of like settled on the etiquette of it really at the moment. But if you do want to include references on there, then absolutely do include them. You know, that they are useful to have. Make sure before you do it though, make sure you do get the permission of the person that you're using as a referee that they're going to be on your CV, and do give them that kind of right to say, no, I don't want my email being fired out there across various different job boards, etc., etc. I mean, we don't go spamming people or anything like that. Once we get references, that's not how we go. But on the other hand, it is somebody else's data. So, you know, if you contact the referee first, get their permission, add them to the CV. If not, as I say, most of the CVs that I get just say references available on request. And then once we make a job offer, that's the point at which we'll go, okay, who are these references? Let's have those reference conversations. So, the final thing that I wanted to cover is, now that we've got this amazing CV written and it's looking lovely and you're really happy with it, Distribution of that CV. Okay. Now, there's many ways to get your CV out there onto the market. I mean, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug Ucas Scientific for a second. So we're a chemistry recruitment agency, and we'd be a good place to send over your CV to, and we can certainly help with your job hunting if it's in one of the core fields that we work with. From a direct application standpoint, the chemical and life sciences industry is a massive industry within the UK. The fine chemical and pharmaceutical companies alone, at small to mid-scale, actually outnumber McDonald's restaurants by a ratio of 2 to 1. And it was almost exact. There was a report done around about the time of the Brexit referendum where they just basically counted how many SME chemical companies we've got in the UK, and I think they had 2,499. And then on that day, I think there was 1,250 McDonald's restaurants open in the country. So it's a nice kind of like thought to say, okay, look, I know where my nearest 4 McDonald's are. So do you. We all do. Do you know where your nearest 8 chemical companies or life science companies are? Right. So that's the first point, is that there's a lot of them out there. Why don't we know about them? Well, whenever we buy a product, right, we don't necessarily act as a customer of the company that sold us that particular product. So let's say, for example, the white pigment in my mouse, or the pharmaceutical that I might have taken this morning, or whichever else. I'm not going to go to Apple and say, right, I'll buy a mouse, and then go to the company that makes the coating and say, right, can you coat that mouse for me? It's not how it works. You just buy the mouse. Now, I've bought another company's chemical coating. Apple haven't made that. They've asked another company to make it, and they're their supplier. Probably doing very well, I'd imagine, if you're making mouse coatings for Apple. Same applies to a pharmaceutical company. I'm not going to go to a company that makes active pharma ingredients and purchase my pharmaceuticals from them. I'm going to go to Boots. I'm just going to pick up whatever I need, but it's going to contain chemistry. But you're never a direct customer of that company. What does that matter from a standpoint of CV distribution? Well, because we're not direct customers of these companies, the natural knowledge as to who's out there, it's not there for us. It's not there for us because they're not in our faces in the same way that other industries are. But in the UK, the chemical industry is ridiculously vibrant. There are generally companies out there who make more money in 1 week than Manchester United do all year. It's a really busy market. Now, on this graph, what I've got at the top right is a map of all of the science parks in the UK. Now, that's not companies, that's parks, each of which has got tens and tens or maybe hundreds of companies registered there. Okay, so that's just a map of the science parks that's in the top right. You've got on the screen there a few different umbrella organisations, and I'd suggest if you're looking at the market, these are great places to look into, because what the umbrella organisations do is they kind of consolidate together all of the different companies that kind of fall into one category. So NEPIC is North East Process Industry Cluster. It's a networking group for, hopefully I won't do them a disservice here, but it's a networking group for for fine chemical companies and any kind of process industry, obviously, companies. Pharma companies are in there. It's a really great resource to go, okay, well, where do I get a list of these companies to work for in my area? Same applies to, obviously good old LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn's an amazing champion of the mid-scale and small business. It's great for large businesses too, but you can really conveniently start to search around your area on LinkedIn geographically and start to see, okay, what companies are registered in the area. Maybe I'll give them a follow. Maybe I'll, keep an eye on what jobs they're recruiting for. Really powerful one. If you're not on LinkedIn yet, that's definitely your next port of call after the CV's written. There's organisations like, for example, Buy Now, which again, it's like a life science, it's like an umbrella organisation. It does a lot of work as well, but what you're looking for here is kind of leads on companies and jobs, and they've got a lot of listings as to who's registered, and they also have a great job section, and Ucas Scientific's jobs are on there as well. And then Chemicals Northwest, again, another great organisation, which again will detail out those companies as well that are members of the chemical industry, and again, that's Northwest based. Now, whatever part of the country you're watching this in, though, if you look around, you will find that there is one of these types of organisation in your area, and I would say now that you know that these kinds of organisations exist, it's a really great port of call for you when you've got your CV written, because what they can do is then say, okay, let's shine a light on the local companies that you could potentially work for, or indeed if you're going to relocate, they can look into, you can look at the companies in the area that you're moving to, and you can find them through that means. The final one, I think my video might be covering it actually, is a website called Ucas. That's not the University Application System, that's the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. Now, what Ucas are is an auditing and certification body. that basically apply a certain standard to a certain industry. So for example, in medical devices, it'd be ISO 13485 would be their code, and then to have their accreditation to that code, they have to follow a certain set of points and they have to maintain that standard. And if they maintain that standard, they get to keep their Ucas stamp and they put that on their products and they say, yep, here we go, we're certified, out there we go into the world selling our products, and our customers can be nice and confident because they know that an independent external auditor has come in and has looked at us, and they will continue to look at us, and you can be confident in them as well as us, right? Brilliant thing to have as a business. A lot of businesses highly covet them, and a lot of businesses have them. That is a publicly searchable database that you can put your postcode in, and you can put what kind of company you're searching for, and it will give you the companies in that area that have that certification. So let's say, for example, you've done a degree in a field that's related to medical devices. You can search for ISO 13485 registered companies within your region, and you will get a list of all those companies. Best thing about a Ucas certificate that I absolutely love is that you've got a point of contact in the top right of one. It's got to be a responsible person. It tends to be the lab manager. So that's something that is really useful, and it gives you that nice point of contact within the business. So it's a bit of an open secret, but Ucas certificates are a great resource if you're looking into a market and you may be looking to build up a couple of contacts as well. So there's a free hint there. This is a snapshot. You will find other resources out there. You would also find that at Ucas Scientific, we're happy to look into our own network. I won't pretend that we know absolutely everybody, but we do have a cracking network of clients that we work with, and we can distribute CVs really well to those companies. And yeah, generally speaking, once you start looking into this, it does turn into a bit of a can of worms, but it's a good can of worms because you can start to sort of take that control of your job hunting. You can start to say, okay, right, I tangibly, know what the demands are in local to me. I can take the activity of introducing my CV to those companies, and hopefully the consequence of that is going to be, plenty of interviews and hopefully a job offer for me, as I'm sure there will be. So if there's any other questions, I'm more than happy to always take in an email. Always happy to have a conversation, and good luck with it. And I look forward to hearing from you if you choose to send your CV through to Ucas Scientific. Thank you again for watching today. Thanks.